Distinguished participants, Mr. Shakil, Durrani, my co-panelist. I see some distinguished people from the civil services and from others. It's very sorry that Mr. Salman Faruqi, who was very keen to come himself at this session, unfortunately, has not been able to do so. So it is up to us. We actually don't have that much time. We are given 10 to 15 minutes each, but we hope we can at least have some comments, one or two, at the end of the session, which is only for 30, 35 minutes. There is a Chinese proverb which says, "May you live in interesting times." And Faruqi Sahab has certainly lived in interesting times, and his 5 or 6 decades in government service have certainly been an interesting time. And we, at about a few years younger than him, really want to say, I wish we would live in normal times. This country seems to, something is happening all the time. And I spent the last few days reading through his book. It's not as long as Shahab Nama, which was 1,600 pages, but is 400 pages, and I think comes across from a civil servant who distinguished himself during his career, and distinguished himself as a doer, a person who could deliver things. And he conveys that in his book. You know, he says, I took up this project, and he moves from ministries to ministries in his entire career and makes far-reaching changes wherever he goes. And it's a readable, interesting, and I would say important book. And since everybody reading a book by a senior civil servant who has actually been close to or known or worked with at least 4 or 5 heads of state of Pakistan, starting from the mid-80s with Mr. all the way down to Zardari. So I would certainly say there is much to recommend about this book. But if you were looking for some kind of something hidden or some new secrets emerging or some juicy things, civil servants don't actually, even if they know them, tend to sort of have a stiff upper lip and don't sort of repeat them or mention them, not even to their own families at times. The only one instance which, and I was going through the book, is that when Benazir Bhutto, Shahid later, who was prime minister at the time, visits Turkey as a head of the delegate, and Salman Faruqi being her secretary, principal secretary, is also with her. And in those days, Zardari was kept in the background. When she finds out that Zardari is down with fever, so she rushes back to her room, and members of the mission and some of the junior officers who were with the delegation are in the room. So Faruqi Saab follows her, and she then hugs him on the bed and then puts her hand on his forehead to say if he has fever, and then begins to press his body. Everybody looking at, so what Faruqi Saab is saying is that there was certainly affection as we saw it then. So that was the only part I thought, was somewhat revealing. Now we come to the book itself. I think there are 4 parts of it, and I'll go over it very quickly. The first part is the early life of Mr. Faruqi when he's living in Patiala, and which he writes is well known. I don't know how many people would follow this, for the Patiala peg, which is this 4-finger large drink, but also for the Patiala turban and his family. His father is an established lawyer. They live in a huge Haveli, and his father is in the municipal corporation. And he mentioned something. He had a convertible limousine, so they were well off. And then, partition, the horrors, the tragedies, the family, and the Maharaja of Patiala being indifferent or wanted the Muslims to leave Patiala, unleashes a reign of terror. And young Salman then feels overwhelmed, doesn't quite understand what is happening, sent to jail with his father, then his uncle, his mother's brother is killed, other family members are murdered, gets on a train, sitting in a coach at the end of a platform, trying to figure out what is happening. And then there's an attack on the train, and the Baluch regiment, which is there, says, okay, we can only hold to the, thank God, he was there into first few coaches, and many people die. And then the family comes to Sakkar and settles down there. And, but what impresses me as a reader is how the family springs back. How Pakistan is, and especially then, is a land of opportunity. Faruqi's father becomes a minister in the province, and he starts studying. And when he goes to college, he goes to the college of Mr. Jinnah rather than to St. Patrick's, which he says. And from there, his career begins to develop as a students' union. And there, I think how student unions help bring out potential leaders and others. And one still doesn't quite have free student unions in Pakistan. They came, although Faruqi Sahab mentions that they were restored, but they were then in 1990 again taken aback, and now Sindh government probably has them at least. And Faruqi Sahab becomes president of the NUS. And then you see what the person has is what later on becomes a mark. He takes initiatives. He's going to Sri Lanka, to Colombo. He phones up the Prime Minister, Shoravardi, and tells his secretary, "Main ja raha hoon ji, can you ask him to write a letter for the Prime Minister, Miss Bandanaike?" So he said, "Main pooch leta hoon." Shoravardi was also very flamboyant. I remember him as a child, though. And there he was, and he takes this letter and goes to, and Bandanaike says, only Shoravardi could have written a letter like this. He's a very articulate man. And then he has a picture, and then he says, there's a girl on my left, became Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia. So he kept in touch with me. So, then when Bhutto becomes a young minister, he's holding a convention of the National Union of Students, and then he invites Bhutto Sahab. उसके भी सेक्रेटरी को फोन करता है, कहता है जी मैं पूछूंगा, वो तो बड़े बिजी होते हैं, उसने नहीं पूछा. Bhutto couldn't, was always in search for an opportunity. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto calls him back and ज़रूर जाएंगे. And then he says there were lots of students from East Pakistan, And he gives one of his mesmerizing speeches, and every student looks up. And then he goes and shakes hands with every delegate to me, and talks most to the ones from East Pakistan. So that's things from his earlier life. Then, perhaps an overconfident Salman Faruqi appears in the Federal Public Service Commission civil service examination, and is later surprised to learn that he has got customs, excise, and taxation department. And he says, oh, how did this happen? Then he reflects, and he remembers a judge who may not have been the chairman from Peshawar High Court or something, who asked him a question, young man, what do you prefer, parliamentary or presidential system? And he gives a long speech on parliamentary system. And the judge says later on, wo to sab chor the, or ye tha, or wo the, and almost fails him. But he had done well enough, and other students members were impressed. But he joins it. He doesn't take the exam again. But he said, I learned my first lesson as a civil servant. You must be politically correct. That's a fairly interesting remark in this book. And then he starts his career, which goes on from being a custom officer, goes and sort of sitting in wait for smugglers and gold and this and that, and carrying out reforms, even from those days, and suggesting changes. And this then is the bulk of the book, which Shakil will talk about, where he comes across truly as a man who was always there to take up a challenge, comes to a job with an open mind and says, let's change things around. And he has a humility which you rarely see in civil servants. He has a humility which attracts people. I mean, all call me. I worked with him as chief economist. Dr. Sahab, aap kya kar rahe hain? मैंने कहा जी खाना खा. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. फिर डॉक्टर साहब, I'm sorry to trouble you. ये आप कर देंगे, ये प्राइम मिनिस्टर के लिए स्पीच लिख. I mean, but the way he would ask you, you could not say no to him. And he had this, and this comes out across his career, whether it is the telephone, communication revolution, the mobile phones. And he once told me a story. He said, my wife and I were in an Intercon hotel in Lahore. And there was a landlord, उसके साथ एक बंदा शलवार कमीज और उसने जो उस ज़माने के मोबाइल होते थे ना उसके साथ एक नौकर होता था जो वो आपके would carry your mobile. And so his wife said to him, ये आपने reforms की हैं? So he said, I was a bit taken aback, but then he says, 6 months or a year later, we were at our home, and we were sitting on his brother's house, and it was one of those where the kitchen was downstairs. So rotiyan khatam ho gayi. So the bearer picks up the mobile phone and says, "Bhi rotiyan khatam ho gayi hain." तो कहता मैंने अपनी बेगम को कहा शाहताज को अब देखें how the mobile phone has created a revolution. Then he talks about. But one thing which seems to come across is that early on in his life, he became very much for private enterprise, for entrepreneurs, for privatization, for liberalization. And I think he went, when Benazir takes over, and she sends him to 10 Downing Street. Thank you. Margaret Thatcher says, how does she run 10 Downing Street? And when Thatcher meets him, I think she tells him, don't talk, and all these old fogies here are for the role of the state. Forget about it. I'm trying to dismantle it. I think that then stands out in the rest of his career. Now, I should hand over to... But then, in the end, he reflects on it all. He reflects on his life, and he retires, and he tries to get his pension started. And then he discovers कि भाई पाकिस्तान में कोई काम कराना आसान नहीं है। आपकी डेट ऑफ बर्थ क्या थी, आप डिप्टी कमिश्नर रहे हैं वहाँ, उसके तो हमारे पास कागज़ ही नहीं है। सो एंड देन ही गोज ऑन, देन ही reflects on his life. And he says, you know, we didn't do enough for common people. He started in local bodies, perhaps I should have stayed there. And then he sums it up in his letter to dear Mr. Jinnah. And there, which he later realizes nobody can quite take, he says, we have tried to, it's not what you expected, but we hope and we will deliver a perfect Pakistan. So I end here with one last remark. The elephant in the room and the elephant in this country and even in this Lahore Literary Festival is what is happening around us today. And the whole question of holding free and fair elections. And he gives, from the very beginning, I think, first he says, for example, one should be politically correct. Then he talks about Ayub Khan's elections. And then he mentions the commissioner, calls the deputy commissioner, who's got a very good result in favor, and says, Mubarak ho, aapne 90% votes Ayub Khan ke liye le liye. So the deputy commissioner says, sir, I'm sorry, I was going to get 100%. But, you know, one or two people changed their mind, sir, but otherwise I would have got 100%. And then he goes on, and sorry, I've gone on for too long, but I thought it's a very readable book, it's a good book, and I hope you enjoy reading it. I'm sorry, I've gone too long indeed. Please.
Haji, ladies and gentlemen, we were allotted 30 minutes, 23 minutes have passed, so I'm going to speak for 7 minutes. Aur uske alawa, there is two other matters which were not planned, and my words, which I was not going to read, I was to speak more or less extempore. But then two things happened, and I'm not responsible for either. Firstly, Salman Faruqi Saab was to be here, and he's the most remarkable person, one of the most remarkable persons I've seen in life. And then I'd made a request to someone perhaps even more remarkable, and he too couldn't attend, Sayyid Babar Ali. And I've known both of them for over 30 years, 3 decades. They greatly impressed me. And my words were sort of tailored around the two of them, because I thought these two and 3 other people, which I have to mention because I don't get too many opportunities to speak about our heroes. And people tend to forget our heroes, because I thought Pakistan's greatest hero might well be Dr. Ruth Faw, great friend of mine, one of the most amazing persons. I also had the good fortune of meeting Abdul Sattar Idi and Dr. Rizvi, Adib Rizvi. And when you add these two, I thought these 5 are some of the most remarkable people I've met in life. Unfortunately, most of the 2 dazzling stars are not here, Salman Faruqi Saab and Sayyid Babar Ali Saab. Secondly, I spoke to you about the time. But the few minutes that I have with me, I'll just focus on maybe 1, maybe 2 aspects of Salman Faruqi's life and his career in the services. So as Farid Zakaria says, let's begin. You know, his journey started from Patiala, as Rashid Saab was saying, and this book is more of a lament. You know, I actually told him that this is a lamentation, and the fact that you have called it Dear Mr. Jinnah, I think you should have renamed it. You should call it Very Sorry, Mr. Jinnah, because of the mess that we have made of our country. And the mess started very early. You know, Salman Faruqi Sahab was lucky. His train it was a gruesome journey, full of blood and gore, but they reached Lahore. And about a year later, there was another journey, a much shorter journey, from Moripur airport to the Governor General's house. And the Governor General, there was no one to receive him. His ambulance broke down. And there was no one to take him quickly. And what happens? The ranking people in the government were sitting in the Governor General's house, deciding who would be the new boss and what positions they would get. So, you know, that was the country's first failure. And then he continues to recount the failures after failures. The failure, for instance, of to develop a constitution for 10 years. The failure to treat East Pakistan the way we treated East Pakistan. The failure by introducing parity between East Pakistan and West Pakistan as if the other excess millions in East Pakistan didn't mean a thing. The failure to impose one unit in West Pakistan. The failure of the Justice Munir's court, federal court in 1954. So he keeps recounting those failures, and the failures are many. Fortunately, there were also many successes. And amongst the successes, there are a number which can be attributed directly to, 3 minutes left, directly to Mr. Salman Faruqi. The telecommunication revolution that he brought about, the IPP's program, Independent Power Producers, he was the guiding force behind that. And unfortunately, it was meant to be just for 2,000, to develop 2,000 megawatts. It was so profitable that those who mattered in this country, the rich and the famous, including the late lamented film actor Muhammad Ali and his wife Zeba, they also applied for an IPP because it was just great fun. There was a lot of money coming that way. So you needed 2,000 megawatts. We ended up with issuing LOIs of 25,000 megawatts. So this was meant to be for a 2-year program. It has now continued for about 25 years. But more than that, you know, the Dyamir Basha Dam, very few people know. It was Salman Faruqi Saab, as deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, that he had the PC1s approved. And I must mention that were it not for Mr. Yusuf Raza Gilani, who was the Prime Minister, and in the Council of Common Interest, the Dyamir Basha Dam was unanimously approved by all the provinces. Otherwise, it would have gone the way Kalabagh has gone. And I'm a great supporter of Kalabagh. But there are two other amazing achievements. CPEC is one, which appears to have gone off track over the last few years. But the trailblazer was the Benazir Income Support Program. And I know Mr. Faruqi had a pivotal role to play in it, along with Begum Shahnaz Wazir Ali, and I must mention President Asif Zardari. But I did travel with Salman Faruqi Saab to Washington and to other places, and whenever this program was raised, the World Bank, the State Department, the private sector, the United Nations, they all supported the cash grants. And it started off well. Unfortunately, they also lost their way midway, but this was one other program which he made. Now, I have said, and I feel, and I just sort of raised this issue with Salman Faruqi Saab on the telephone, that his 5 years as the Secretary General to the President of Pakistan saw some amazing, some most momentous moments in the history of Pakistan in terms of security and foreign policy. It was during that time that the war on terror started. March 2009. This time that Salala post in Mumbai was attacked, 24 killed. Aptabad raid, Raymond Davis, Memo Gate. And I feel, though he has mentioned all these, he needs to do much more. He needs to inform posterity about each of these 5 or 6 events that I've mentioned. Just mentioning them is not enough. And I've already said that to him. But he feels that there are certain things he cannot mention. And he's a very considerate person, very caring, considerate person. He just cannot write anything improper, derogatory about anyone else. But I think for the benefit of posterity, he needs to write more about it. My final thought is that, and Salman Faruqi Sahib mentioned that, is that there's an American judge, he mentions, Felix Frankfurter, who says that the most important position in the state is not that of the prime minister. The most important position in the state is that of the citizen, the common man. And it's the common man we ignore. So there are many of us civil servants over here, and over a lifetime, maybe tens of thousands of people have come before us. They come with a lament. They have a grievance. We must put ourselves, or the better ones amongst us, put ourselves in their shoes. That, he's desperate, he's lonely, he's not influential, and he must be heard. And soon after that, since Faruqi Sahib got on to be the ombudsman, he brought about, again, a revolutionary change in the office of the ombudsman. Some of our friends over here have been associated with that. So from 15,000 cases being redressed every year, 100,000 cases were being redressed. And he was at pains to address the difficulties of the citizen, the common man. We as bureaucrats, we don't think of the common man. The politicians, the less said, the better. But if only we could follow Justice Frankfurter, we would be a happier state. En passant, as they say, in the passing, there was this chief minister of KP. And once he was sitting over there, and he said, the best post in the world is that of a chief minister. And I said, let's see what's he up to. And he says, that's the best post, and that's the easiest post in the world. You order anything, it gets done. You want a DIG removed, he's changed. A commissioner, he's changed. You want to appoint someone else, he's changed. You want to sanction ₹1 billion for a hospital or a school or whatever, or a road somewhere, it's got done. It's the easiest position and the best position, and he was very pleased with himself. Later, in a roundabout manner, I told him that, this is the most difficult position. If you understand your oath of office. Now, the oath of office, people read it. So, it's a symbolic manner, and some of them cannot even pronounce the words in the oath properly. But this is what Salman Faruqi Sahib has been focusing upon. And I requested him about an hour back that this launch is not acceptable to me. He'll have to do it again. And so that we have it maybe in Lahore or in Islamabad and do more justice to him. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I believe we have no time now left. So maybe if there's any very pressing question, I don't see anybody. So thank you so much.